I still can't hear myself. I still can't hear myself. Wait a minute, I did something. I still can't hear myself. Wait a minute, I did something. Can you guys hear me now? I think I can hear myself. Okay, cool. Hello, Circus Music. Thank you. Mandy, welcome. All right, let's let some of you pile in first before we talk about the article that I read today. I also wanted to update you guys. I got it. I got Cyrus' book. Hello, Lucy. Welcome. So good to see you. I was teasing Lana from Truth and Transparency earlier. And I was like, show us the bookmark. And she's like, it's there. Like, just look closer. And I actually clicked on the picture. Because you know how when you click on the picture in a post, the picture gets bigger. And it was there. It was sticking out of the top. And of course, here's my bookmark. Okay, I don't know if you guys could see it. And then there's the back. So I have read a few chapters of this. Yes, Lucy, twice in 1 week. And I don't really want to talk about if Ray thinks Brian is guilty or not, and I don't want to give too much away from the book, but I do want to say this is considered more of a textbook, and I think he's more writing about the system and how they operate and how they'd be able to validate their work, incorporate new work. And so I think he has developed not only a new system, but I think that there is also a software that probably goes with this. And I think he wants to make it like a real-time software so you can recall anybody's testimony quickly. You can recall the chain of custody, which, as we learned, is different from where it's located in the evidence locker. Lucy. Oh my gosh. Lucy has some people in her basement. We could talk about that on a different live. I'm so happy to see you all. So I would think that this new software or system that he wants to implement into court, specifically for digital evidence, but I also think this type of AI machine learning is also in DNA, especially in trace DNA. I do believe a lot of it is used for blood DNA, but blood DNA has a lot more data, a lot more information that can be seen. And so it might use software just for validation because you probably have enough data there to be able to make some hypotheses, whereas there are some trace DNA profiles that are solely reliant on software. And I think that is where we should be very cautious is who's doing the machine learning and what kind of data is being used with the machine learning. Because if you're putting biased data from our current bias system into these machine learning predictive AI models, then you might get biased outcomes. And from my understanding, which I'm barely grasping the fundamentals of how this AI and machine learning works, and I don't think it's something to be especially afraid of. I think it's something just to be aware of, because when we're jurors or future jurors, we can slow down and say, I'm not really comfortable with this AI learning. From the last time I looked up one of Audrey's videos, or the last time I saw or read something, even forensic scientists aren't well versed in how machine learning is yet. So if you don't even have the users of this, of any kind of software, users of machine learning, and they're not really equipped, trained, resourced to use this type of technology, then who is, and how is this trained? What are the settings on the software? How does this AI assisted system work? And I do think if the public does, this is not legal advice, but if the public does come together and we devalue anything that seems like machine learning or AI, then the system will be forced to use another method. As once as they realize the public is just not having this, they can't really rely on it as often. And I think that's a balance, like a counterbalance to all of this AI doom and gloom. And I just wanted to go over a little bit about it today because, I mean, I think reading about it for me wasn't scary because I'm just like, I think as future jurors, I think we still do have some power. We have the power to provide, guilty or not guilty verdicts. And if we don't like the system the state uses to present us information, we don't have to accept it. There's no rules that say we have to accept that state expert's testimony. And I don't know if you guys saw Pav's latest video where he showed clips of Agent Balance giving testimony in court for the Chad Daybell case. And Pav made a great point. Balance kept coming back around to the same thing. We know the basic sector. We can't really pinpoint exactly where somebody is. So it's not exactly like we know exactly where someone is. We have the basic 1,000 square miles, whatever sector, and then they talk about the different types of the strength of the signal. So then there again, you have an expert testifying where, yeah, they are using technology that I don't understand, but then they're also putting in there these caveats that are like, well, it doesn't really pinpoint anybody. So I don't know if I have been jaded and I have believed in the CSI effect for all of my life, that I thought that these technologies that they were using were actually precise, but it doesn't look like it. And I also have a worry because a lot of the state experts, law enforcement, and tech companies, they keep touting the same line: presence equals guilt. And we know with trace DNA, just because it's detectable, just because it is present at a crime scene, that doesn't necessarily mean that person should be a suspect. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person, that profile should be probative. So whenever they are doing these machine learnings to, fill in a profile or use these predictive models, they can predict what the rest of the profile should look like, and they'll output confidence scores. And we don't know how they calculate those confidence scores. And, like a grade point system, like 87% or 32% confident. So they have some sort of grading system of how confident they are with this outcome. What I'm still trying to learn is, if you saw that video with Professor Jameson, I believe he was from Ireland, he explained that especially with touch or trace DNA, especially mixtures, experts can deconvolute that. They can extract or use the AI assisted system with predictive modeling to tell you what types of DNA profiles are in there. And just because the software is capable of outputting a specific number, a specific percentage, because that's how it's programmed, that doesn't necessarily mean that profile is in that trace touch DNA mixture. Just because a software is capable, that doesn't mean it actually reflects the environment, the reality of what is happening, because he gave the example that he poured that glass of water, He poured the pitcher into his glass so he could have water, and the host did too. So he said, you and I DNA profiles are going to be in this, invisible trace mixture. Now, if you think about alphabet soup and you have a certain string of letters, you can spell a lot of different words with that. You'll have several different words, but you're not quite sure what the right word is. So you could be picking out from the DNA mixture soup a profile that's not present, because you have more chances to create more profiles with the two contributors that you know of. There could be an underlying third contributor. And from what I was reading from this article, they do have predictive models that can help predict how many contributors are in a specific profile. And it seems to me now that a lot of the state law enforcement and tech companies, they're moving towards trace DNA. I don't know if it's because it's their new glamorous software, the technology that's in fashion, but I think we also need to be very careful when you're applying that to somebody's life, especially in like capital cases. But like I said before, it's prosecutors are not contributing to the wrongful convictions. It's the juries. The juries are the ones that wrongfully convict. So I think as juries, future juries, we are allowed to have a general understanding of what it is they're actually doing. And another thing is machine learning, that type of evidence or any output from it, there's no rules. There's no admissibility rules. Judges don't really know what to do with it. And so the only thing I think they can do is, like, anytime they get some output from any of these AI assisted programs, they have to label it as a lead, because there is no place for it in the judicial system yet. So they have access to all of this high technology and all of these AI systems that are not compatible with our justice system. And so they're like, yeah, we have a lead and we're confident. And especially at the press conference, when Fry and Captain Lanier, they were up there saying, we don't want to reveal anything about our investigation, but trust us, we're confident in it. To me, I feel like that means that they did use a lot of these AI assisted programs, but they're just not allowed to talk about it. And they don't want to. And I know they do use signal words. And they did use signal words in some of their motions about the car and the CSLI data. And I do think, they have like advanced DNA techniques. I do believe that means AI. So as we go through this article, I'm going to try to break it down. We don't have to, we can look at it through a systems lens. What do these terms mean? And we can say how many people in the scientific community actually understand how this works? Who is the one that's doing the machine learning? What kind of data? So we don't have to necessarily put up the brakes because we're like, oh no, we're talking about AI and that's scary. No, we're going to get into what words mean, what this could possibly mean, and what are the potential consequences? What are the good things? Because this could be good. It just depends on what's the foundation. If you are in information systems, it's all about data integrity. We want to make sure the data that is going into these AI assisted systems, they have quality data. Oh, typically unique, welcome. Typically unique says, I love the soup analogy. Yeah, I got that from NIST. I do have a live video where I go over my favorite article from NIST, and it has the soup example in it. Oh, Lucy Morningstar, she has shared a link. Oh, thank you, Lucy. Okay, so yes, if you want to follow along, Lucy has put the link in the chat. It is this one. Typically Unique says she watched the video where I go over my favorite article from NIST with the soup analogy. That is a very good one. Okay. Now, this article is from 2024, I believe. So it is 2 years old. Here we go. March 2024. Okay, so usually I would say about a year or two that most DNA articles are still good, but you also want to check the sources at the bottom to make sure that they are either sourcing one of these like primary sources, like an article written by Orshot, one of these founding members of DNA, and to make sure that that is an article that is still cited throughout the community. But now we have machine learning, and I don't know how fast, the technology is actually changing. So even though this is only a 2-year-old article, keep that in mind. And I also want to look at these scientists. This one says he's from San Jose University in California. That's Mark Barash. We have Dennis McNevin, and he is from the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. Okay. Okay, how do I go back? There we go. Okay, we have Vladimir Fedorenko, and he is from the Educational and Scientific Laboratory of Forensic Science Materials Engineering of the Saratov State University in Russia. All right, and we have Pavel Giverts. They're from the Division of Identification and Forensic Science, Israel Police HQ in Jerusalem. Okay, so we have a global group. I do know that there is a push in DNA to globalize and standardize standards. And so, well, I'm sure it's not unusual that scientists do get together from all over the world. But I think that's quite interesting here. So here are the highlights. The scientific foundation of machine learning algorithms is explained. Machine learning applications in the area of forensic DNA analysis are briefly discussed. Recent machine learning developments in the human DNA identification field are critically reviewed. Advantages and challenges of implementing machine learning methods into operational casework are addressed. Okay, so here, I think they're going to define machine learning. Oh, hello, Roca-Rola. Did I miss anybody here? Angel Eyes, welcome. Okay. So they're going to define machine learning. They're going to abbreviate it to ML. Is a range of powerful computation algorithms capable of generating predictive models via intelligence, autonomous analysis of relatively large and often unstructured data. This is one long sentence for AI-assisted system. So if we see terms like powerful computational algorithms, I think we can be confident they are speaking about an AI system. And especially when they use this word predictive or models, I do believe they're talking about an AI-assisted system as well. So those are some indicators. They're kind of hidden in the language, but they are there. And so machine learning has become an integral part of our daily lives with a plethora of applications, including web, businesses, automotive industry, clinical, diagnostic, scientific research, and more. And more recently, forensic science. In the field of forensic science DNA, the manual analysis of complex data can be challenging, time-consuming, and error-prone. The investigation of novel machine learning-based models may aid in streamlining this process while maintaining the high accuracy, reproducibility required for forensic tools. Due to the relative novelty of such applications, the forensic community is largely unaware of machine learning capabilities and limitations. This is one of the most important sentences in here, and it's right in the abstract. Due to the relative novelty of such applications, the forensic community is largely unaware of machine learning capabilities and limitations. Okay, and also remember this article is from 2024. So I don't know how widespread machine learning is used throughout forensic science, in particular in DNA. It's probably used in the digital data. I would imagine it would be used more so there because, you know, you're already in a digital world, and these AI assisted systems, you know, you could consider them part of the digital world. Okay, and then furthermore, computer science and machine learning professionals are often unfamiliar with forensic science field and its specific requirements. This manuscript offers a brief introduction to the capabilities of machine learning methods and their applications in the context of forensic DNA analysis, and offers a critical review of the current literature in this rapidly developing field. Okay, welcome, Gerald. And anybody wants to follow along, Lucy Morningstar has put the link in the chat. Let me see if I can pin this to the top of the chat. Okay, I can't figure out how to pin it. Here we go, pin message. Okay, now it should be at the top of the chat for anybody who wants to follow along. Okay, thank you, Lucy. Okay. All right, so they have a bunch of abbreviations here. I can tell you, when I read it earlier, I saw a lot of this GAN, and GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Networks. Okay, so hopefully they will define that a little further down, because a lot of these things this is all new terminology. Oh, however, I do see NOC. That is a current abbreviation for a number of contributors. That is something that they use often in forensic DNA analysis. And also PG, probabilistic genotyping. That is also something that I do recognize from other articles that I have read. And also the PGS, the probabilistic genotyping software. Oh, we know this one. We all know SMP, single nucleotide polymorphism. That's that. That's the SMP goes with the IgG, and the STR goes with what the law enforcement usually tests. I'm sure that that's all going to change, but as of right now, we've seen the SNP, the SMP in the Brian Koberger case. We use this abbreviation used a lot. Okay, oh, stochastic threshold, one of my favorites. So this is also another term that is regularly used in forensic science, and they have abbreviated that to ST. Okay, oh, there's another one we know, the STR, short tandem repeat. We've heard that abbreviation used a lot in this case. Now, TAC, that one doesn't look familiar to me, but the total allele count is something I am familiar with. What else do we have in here? The first one is ANN, Artificial Neural Networks. Analytical threshold, I'm familiar with that one. That's AT. Capillary electrophoresis. Yeah. Okay, so I recognize some of these, and I know you do too. We're going to do our best to, let me see if I can pull this up on another page so that when we are further down, I can quickly reference what it is. I'll put it right in here. All right, I got it. So we have our reference card. So the keywords in this is going to be machine learning, which we know, forensic DNA profiling, human identification, AR, and STRs. So here's the introduction. Forensic DNA profiling is the backbone of forensic science and one of the most rigorous forensic disciplines. In the last 4 decades, this field has made significant progress and cemented its gold standard reputation by incorporating extremely sensitive, accurate, robust, and extensively validated methods of human identification. All right, first off, I know that they want to keep the illusion that DNA is the gold standard. What has been the gold standard is blood DNA, not necessarily trace DNA. So when they use this kind of persuasive text here, we should be very careful, because for me, blood DNA is not the same as trace DNA, because trace DNA, as we know, your trace DNA can be places you never set foot. So presence doesn't equal guilt. And so the gold standard here, I think they're trying to apply all of the illusions that we thought about blood DNA onto trace DNA. And I just think we should just be aware of that, just be cautious. In similar fashion, machine learning is the fastest growing field of computer science that offers extremely powerful capabilities for intelligent data analysis. Here's another key phrase: intelligent data analysis. That means AI system. These learning algorithms dominate the field of artificial intelligence. There you go. A field which focuses on mimicking human abilities and are considered the benchmark of data processing methods. Now, I'm not against AI. I like AI for certain things, but like, again, if you are a systems auditor, you're in IT, information technology, a lot of your work revolves around data integrity. We want to make sure the data that they are feeding to these AI systems is as unbiased as we can get. So I guess in reality, of course, there is going to be some bias in it. I don't know if we can help that. But our current system, we know that the bias and the benefit of the doubt is actually given to the state. The state has so much power when they're in the courtroom, and a lot of judges defer to the state. That is something that I didn't really understand or know before the Koberger case, but as I've been learning, that is a common thing in their workplace. And a lot of these judges are former prosecutors. There are some that are former defense attorneys, but you know, they are people too, so they do probably lean one way to the other, and they probably do give benefits to the state. And I don't know if they even realize it. Okay, so machine learning has penetrated almost every aspect of our lives. Many of us are used to the fact, although not always aware, that machine learning algorithms are used for producing fruitful web searches, web search results, targeting online advertisements. Who gave a watermelon? Lyanne, thank you for the watermelon. I can see it on my phone, but I can't see it on StreamYard. They are effective spam filters in their email boxes. Sometimes AI can write an email for you too. There are email services for that. You can do photo tagging or social networks, predictive stock market trends, constructing self-driving cars, better understand the human genome structure and any additional applications. In forensic science, however, the application of machine learning is still in its infancy. Okay, let's read that again. In forensic science, however, the application of machine learning is still in its infancy. And again, remember, this article is 2 years old, but I don't know if it's widely adopted throughout the nation. And I think we should remember that, especially if they're going to say they have leads, quote unquote leads, and that's how they got this information. And like, how else do you describe it? I don't think you can be in court and say, hey, we used AI, we used machine learning. I think that's going to cause a snowball effect that the state doesn't necessarily want, and it might hold up the court system before they figure out policy and they figure out like rules of admission for it. So I think there is a bottleneck here. That's just something to keep in mind. And hello, Read Deeply. Read Deeply says, I'm so happy to catch you live. You're literally the only other person who remembers the sheath in the yard with the snap and the micro DNA. Well, I do remember I think it was a week or two, maybe even a week after 11/13/2022, after it happened. And I thought they said they found the sheath in a dumpster, but like it was outside the house. And I did find a few articles that did have that there, but I think most of them have been scrubbed. And I don't know how true that is. Okay. So this is primarily due to the fact that most forensic scientists are not aware of the possibilities of machine learning. While machine learning and data mining specialists are not familiar with specific tasks that arise when conducting forensic science examinations. This manuscript aims to briefly describe the key capabilities of machine learning and provide a critical review of its potential applications in forensic DNA profiling. Due to a relatively wide variety of such applications, this paper mainly focuses on the area of human identification. Briefly delving into the forensic applications. Section 1, subsection 1.1, introduces the topic of machine learning and its mathematical and computational foundations. I do believe this is probably another keyword that indicates it's something else. Maybe that could be the data used for machine learning, or that could be the output. And of course, the mathematical equations they use to get from one to the other, which we don't know how they do that in any of these things. Subsection 1.2 presents a brief overview of the main machine learning machine learning methods. Section 1.3 gives examples of problems that can be solved with machine learning approach, such as classification, clustering, regression analysis, dimensionality, reduction, and generative models, while in subsections 1.3.4 and 1.3.5, we discuss the topics of dimensionality, reduction, and generative models by using examples from forensic intelligence applications, such as prediction of externally visible characteristics and biographical ancestry. Biographical ancestry from DNA. That will certainly be interesting. Okay. Read Deeply says there's so many places: the bedroom, the yard, the dumpster, the floor. They couldn't decide. Yeah, I mean, there were questions about the chain of custody of that sheath as soon as we heard about it. All right, section 2 focuses on machine learning applications for forensic STR analysis, the main focus of this article, and provides detailed insights into the challenges related to human identification. It was HID. Okay, yeah, it's HID, stands for human identification. So Section 2 provides detailed insights into the challenges related to human identification applications, emphasizing how the power of machine learning is harnessed to address these challenges. We explore the application of machine learning in STR genotyping using CE and MPS data. CE is the capillary electrophoresis. I think that's a graph where they have to inject dye sometimes to be able to read it. What is MSP? I have our list over here. Oh, did I not list that one in their list? Oh, let me right click this so I don't get off the page. Okay, so they don't even define what MPS data is. Okay. And its potential to enhance accuracy and efficiency. We begin by delving into the complexities arising from the use of MPS technology for STR genotyping. Was that something up here that we learned? All right. We begin by delving into the complexities arising from the use of MPS technology for STR genotyping, which generates vast genomic data and presents the need for more sophisticated bioinformatic tools. Furthermore, we explore the role of machine learning in DNA mixture interpretation, a particular challenging aspect of forensic DNA analysis. As we delve into the applications of machine learning and SGR genotyping, we see the logical progression of leveraging machine learning for improved forensic DNA analysis. Now, these techniques, they could be accurate. I am just skeptical because I don't know how they got to their answers. Um, and I'm just like, if I was ever a juror, I would be afraid of a wrongful conviction. I would really like to have a sense of what this information means. And I understand that they have experts to help explain it, but even then, it's like, I mean, we've heard these experts speak in the Brian Koberger case, the state ones, the state experts, and I mean, Riley Nolan wanted to say it was direct transfer. Well, it could have been, but there's no way to tell. I guess until you get into machine learning, maybe. So the machine learning approach in the classical scientific, okay, Lucy Morningstar says, I've heard a bunch of nonsense. Right. And so I think we've heard a lot of overstating the DNA evidence in the Brian Koberger case. And if you saw Pob's video, I think his latest one with Agent Balance is giving testimony for the Chad Daybell case. And he keeps saying, well, it's a bigger area. We can tell kind of what sector you're in. Okay, well, how large is that sector? That sector could be like 100 miles. Like, you know, it's a geographical location where somebody could be anywhere in that area because they're pinging on a certain tower. So they can't directly pinpoint someone. But that's usually the argument, or that's usually the magic that some of this digital and DNA evidence has, where we think that they can see exactly where this person was. When Balance keeps coming around to the same thing, oh, we can do the general sector of where it is because it doesn't actually work, you know. like it is that the state is actually trying to argue it does. So I think we're more aware now of how these state experts are testifying, and that, yeah, some of them do stretch the science. And I think that's, just be cautious. I mean, that's all. And we're allowed to ask questions. We're allowed to look more into, like, what are you state experts really talking about? So the classical scientific approach to the study of a phenomenon or effect, scientists usually explore all the relationships between the elements of a system under study. Once identified, these relationships are analyzed and used to create a comprehensive mechanistic model that describes the system. This is how most of the basic formulas used in physics, mechanics, thermodynamics, chemistry, and other sciences were derived. In the engineering sciences, however, the analytical formulas developed for ideal models do not always accurately reflect the real world. All right, I like that. However, the analytical formulas developed for ideal models do not always accurately reflect the real world. I think, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, that example I gave earlier of one of my lives, and I think I clipped a little bit on my video tab too, so you might actually be able to find a shorter video. But Professor Jameson, who is from Ireland, he was saying how his DNA, even if he didn't touch the glass pitcher, or even if he did, and the host who may or may not have touched the glass pitcher, both of their DNA is on there because, they're right in front of it, either they're breathing on it, whatever. But since it's a mixture, you can put their profiles right next to each other. But then, because there's, extra pieces, like the soup analogy, where you can have a group of letters and you can spell many different words with as many letters that are in that soup. But that doesn't mean it's actually the right word. So between the two of them, there are other profiles that can technically be generated. The software can generate those, but that doesn't mean that person was ever there. That doesn't even mean that person is actually real. They just have the ability to calculate like a calculator. That doesn't actually reflect reality, that there were only two people present there. But if they have more chances to make an additional profile, I think there are studies that show if they do know the suspect beforehand, they will pick the profile that is closest to their suspect, regardless if that profile is actually real or if that person was actually there. So again, however, the analytical formulas developed for ideal models do not always accurately reflect the real world. And I think we are seeing that with AI-assisted systems, that, it doesn't really capture our real world yet. In addition to the main parameters that determine the behavior of the model, various random factors play their roles. In such cases, scientists would usually develop empirical formulas that include one or more numerical variables, coefficients, designed to factor in influence of unknown environmental factors. Environmental science probabilistic genotyping algorithms use empirical formulas to provide the probability of obtaining the profile in a nominated individual is a DNA. Oh, if a nominated individual is a DNA donor, compared to if they are not a DNA donor. For example, STR Mix, one of the main probabilistic genotyping software, uses an algorithm that incorporates variables like observed and expected allele, and stutter peak heights, and specific DNA loci. So when they say expected allele, that means they think it should be there, but it may not be. But the software can computate output where they give it a confidence score, like a grading system. You could have 86%, you could have 27% all across, and it'll give you the confidence of how likely it thinks, this could be a factor in whatever question you're asking it. So Lucy here says the percent that they come up with are outrageous. We share DNA. So what's the chances we share some level of kinship? Even direct comparisons, I'm leery of anymore. Yeah, I think we should be leery of especially trace DNA. There's a lot of it that I don't understand. And of course, they're trying to put all of these things into it. And it's like, how, as jurors, can we deliberate on something that we just don't? Like, I don't know if I'll ever understand all of this ever. I can understand the basics, and that's really all I could talk about. And, I might not even be correct in my understanding, but I think I understand the fundamental of you put good information in, you might get good information out. So your data integrity is very important. Okay, so where were we? Oh, to estimate the likelihood of the observed peak heights, the algorithm uses a log normal distribution in order to assign probability of the observed peak heights when the factors relating to various potential contributors are varied. Now, I think a good example of this is the DNA under Maddie's nails. I think that was sample 13.1, where the state had used STR mix and they had said Brian Koberger is inconclusive, which means they can't perform the test. They don't know either way. But the state always says, well, we can't rule them out if we don't know. Well, you can't provide the test, so why are you even giving it any credibility? There's no test to be had, so it can't have credibility at this point. But anyway, so they use STR mix, and STR mix has its own settings, and the state lab has its own internal policy. So according to their policies, they were able to make a call, and that call was inconclusive. Now, Ann Taylor, the defense, they challenged that, and they used the software TrueAllele. And that TrueAllele had different software settings, and that lab had a different standard. And then they asked the state analyst, DNA forensic analyst, was it Westrig? So he essentially agreed with the defense that Brian Koberger is excluded, but he did cite several standard organizations of where the general guidelines are to, what these standards and these policies are. He did agree with the defense, but he said the state lab is not necessarily wrong because their policies say they're not wrong. But in the end, he did agree Brian Koberger is excluded and he is not, under Maddie Mogan's nails 13.1. And what that is, they wanted to replicate the testing the state did, and they couldn't. So when you can't replicate a test that the state did, you have a good chance for challenging that and it going in your favor. And in that particular instance, it did go to the defense's favor. So when they're talking about this STR mix, they're talking about the functionality of that software and the data you put into it and the data that comes out of it. I think that is a very basic understanding. I don't think we need to understand forensic DNA to understand that there's data that goes in, there's data that goes out, there's different settings, there's different policy and standards from our national standards organizations like NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and there's also SWIDGAM. That's an abbreviation. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Okay. So the software estimates the likelihood of observed peaks, the algorithms uses a log normal distribution in order to assign the probability of observed peaks when the factors relating to various potential contributors are varied. The empirical formula allows the software to predict peak heights in a probabilistic manner, taking into consideration the inherent variability and unknown influences in the real-world experimental data, which are not able to be fully described by mechanist models using analytical formulae. Additionally, the computational cost of using the empirical formula may be lower compared to more complex analytical formulas, making it more practical for implementation in the software. So the empirical formula provides a way to model the relationship between the peak height and the various unknown factors in a more comprehensible and flexible manner, taking into account the complexities of the real-world system being studied. This is especially useful when the relationships between the data are not fully known. There you go. The relationships between the data is not fully known, so they're going to use predictive software, which is an AI-assisted system, to fill in those blanks. And that system is going to shoot out output with a confidence score, just like a grade. It could be 38%. It could be 79%. We don't know, and we don't know how they grade this output. So this is especially useful when the relationships between the data are not fully known, or the amount of data to or potential number of variables is large and requires statistical analysis techniques. I think this is another keyword for AI-assisted program, to derive meaningful insights. The essential dependence relationship between the variables and functions. Okay, we don't necessarily have to read all this, but the main point here is that for some trace DNA profiles or some incomplete profiles, it is reliant on software. And that is something we should be aware of, and we should be cautious of it, because we don't know how it was programmed, what kind of data, is the data biased, how are they coming up with these outputs, and how did they, just like in healthcare, the doctors are not supposed to diagnose with the AI output. They are still the last in the decision chain. And so how do we know that in this particular workplace or this particular police workforce, is the AI actually making the decisions, or is a seasoned law enforcement officer the last in line for a decision? These are all questions that we don't know. And even though this is not directly related to the process of AI, we're talking about the human factors of it. And I think we're allowed to know that. And I think we're allowed to know these things before we render a guilty or non-guilty verdict, because of DNA. DNA, especially trace DNA, this is the DNA they want to use more in the future, and they're going to give you leads, but this is what they're going to be doing. Basically, they're going to be using software with AI-assisted software. Okay, so however, what if the relationship between the variables are not known? The amount of data as well as the potential variables. This is where the output of confidence scores, that's probably key word for that, are exponentially large. So it can calculate different scenarios a lot faster than a human brain. In this case, statistical analysis such as machine learning can help. Okay, so machine learning represents systems of statistical analysis that enables identification of dependencies in large volumes of data. So it will compute much larger volumes of data than the human can. So then it goes into their XY factors. The primary aim is to make accurate predictions, such as the predictive model should be able to carry out their computations, and they're explaining that a little bit here. What's their formula, their mathematical equations of how they do that. when I read these things, I don't always understand the math, and I definitely don't understand that here. So they do say, they use a key word here called relative scarcity. I don't know what that means in relation to this machine learning, even though we know we can, in the plain English language, we can surmise or look up in the dictionary what relative scarcity means, but it has a different meaning because it's associated with this machine learning, and they've taken on terms and meanings that are not what we would consider straightforward English language. So I'm sure this has something to do with that, just like I am putting out these other key terms like predictive modeling. That's actually the AI assisted software. So there are indications and word phrases that are code for something else. So I don't know if that is actually code for something else. So coupled with relative scarcity of experts who can scrutinize these methods, forensic implementation of machine learning methods should follow relevant developmental and internal validation procedures such as SWID-GAM. Here's what I was talking about earlier, and the validation guidelines for DNA analysis methods. So it goes into a little bit about machine learning. Okay, this is one of the things that I thought was very interesting. So types of machine learning. And we got an awesome graph here. So this should help give you a visual. Oh, hello, Charm Free. Welcome. Machine learning can be arbitrary, categorized into 4 main types: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and semi-supervised learning and reinforcement learning. Each of these categories is briefly discussed below. Okay, so we have this long blue bar that says machine learning methods, and then, okay, they're going to go supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, and reinforcement learning. All right, so this graph, and then it goes into what are the main classifications here, and then it goes into more detail. Now, I know this graph is probably small for you to see, but they do also have it written out down here. So it does say, please note this diagram is not exhaustive and includes only some commonly used machine learning models under specific categories. The tasks such as classification, clustering, regression, and dimensionality reduction can be solved with different machine learning models, hence the overlap in the diagram. Okay, wow. So supervised learning is the most common type of machine learning in general and in forensic DNA analysis in particular. This type of learning, the predictive model, that's the AI model, is first trained with a large structured data set. This is what we're concerned about. What data set did you use? How did you use it? Is it biased information? Did you use the statistics we already have, which are already biased? So the large structured data set is the input variables and the corresponding output variables. Like I said before, data integrity, what you put into the software, and then how did you get to where you have output. The training data in this approach is given in the form of samples with labels. For example, sequences of DNA fragments annotated with labels corresponding to STR loci and flanking regions. The learning algorithm essentially learns the mapping function between the values based on the training data set. Okay, then they're getting a little bit more technical here. So then they're saying supervised learning is generally very effective machine learning method, but requires high quality, normalized, and thoroughly clean training data. Now here they are trying to say, yes, we're not using completely biased information, right, to reduce potential bias. Equal overfitting, so right, so they can overfit the data, they can make the data over friendly, and they can make it have more matches than there actually are. Okay, so they're attempting to say that they are trying to use data that is not biased, but we still don't know what that data actually is. Oh, the last 24 in the mic. Welcome, Mikey. Good to see you. Okay, let's see. Supervised learning can be executed by the two main approaches, classification and regression analyses described below. However, it must be noted that each of these problems, classification, regression, can be approached with other machine learning models categorized under unsupervised or semi-supervised learning categories as outlined. Yeah, and that's another consideration. What AI-assisted systems do you have communicating with each other that contribute to your output, especially in forensic DNA, especially this trace DNA, the invisible DNA? So they're working with something invisible to the naked eye, and they're doing all of this stuff that is reliant on software. Okay. So unsupervised learning does not have a priori structured data target format. In other words, it can also develop a function based on the input, but does not require corresponding outputs for the training data as in the supervised learning approach. Okay, so they say that it's not clean data. Let's read a little more. Given the lack of predefined labels, the algorithms need to be fed a very large comprehensive data set in order to accommodate most of the different scenarios, the connections. This is essential so the model can be efficiently trained to understand properties of the data. In this approach, the task is to organize the data in a similar way as humans do, but for humans, this depends on which features are presented to and extracted by the algorithm. For example, when presented with images of cats, dogs, tigers, and wolves, a child might recognize cats and dogs as pets and recognize tigers and wolves as wild animals. Alternatively, if cat-like and dog-like features were emphasized, extracted, the child might recognize tigers as a form of a cat and wolves as a form of a dog. Unsupervised learning is particularly beneficial when there is a need to automatically organize terabytes of umbrella data into similar clusters with minimal manual intervention, but classification depends on features of the data which may or may not be obvious. So, Lucy Morningstar has also gave us another article. Thank you. The National Human Genome Research Institute. The Encyclopedia of DNA Elements. Cool. I will have to check that out. This is interesting. Oh, they have National Institutes of Health at the bottom. They have USA.gov, the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, so this is an official website. And it does have genome.gov, so that this is very official. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we have the supervised learning data, and then we have the unsupervised learning data that is like, it's another level of, so it doesn't require corresponding outputs. I guess because the outputs of supervised learning is put into the unsupervised learning, okay? And then we're down here at semi-supervised learning. Semi-supervised learning is essentially a blend between supervised and unsupervised learning approaches. This type of machine learning is usually used when there is a large amount of input data, but only a small portion of the data is labeled. The goal of semi-supervised learning is to leverage the additional information contained in the umbrella or the unlabeled data to improve the model's performance, especially when obtaining labeled data is costly, time-consuming, or limited. For example, a model might be supplied with a very large number of raw electrophorograms. to learn to distinguish an allele from background noise, while only a subset of electropherograms and or alleles have been pre-labeled. Okay, so here is, I think, another key term that is, camouflage for something else. It says improve the model's performance. How do they define the model's performance? What do they consider improving? I think that's another one of those terms that actually means something else. Okay. Now, here's the last one in our graph from above. This is the reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is a type of machine learning where an agent, computer program, or an autonomous robot learns to make decisions by interacting with an environment. The agent takes actions and the environment receives feedback in the form of rewards or penalties. Gathering experience and uses this experience to improve its policy through trial and error. This type of machine learning is commonly used in tasks where an agent needs to make informed decisions by learning through trial and error, such as game playing robotics and autonomous systems. Okay. Now, types of problems that can be solved with the machine learning approach. There is a variety of data processing tasks that are well suited for machine learning methods. Some of the problems that can be solved with machine learning include classification, assigning input data to predefined categories or classes. Right, that adds another level to my data integrity example. If you're working with systems auditing or information technology, it's all about data integrity. But then how do you classify that data? Is it in the right category? And these are all things that go into, like, you could think of it as like the computer programming part. I mean, that's a very crude explanation, but so this is all like even before you get to any type of like DNA output, before they even get to is this a match or not a match. They're doing all of these sophisticated things, the data that's going into it. So regression, predicting continuous numerical values based on input data. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but like if you don't tell like STR mix or genome gene mapper, whatever it is, that calculates like the likelihood ratio. I think that's STR mix. Does that software have a function where it says stop calculating after this point? Because if you stop calculating after this point, the data becomes weaker. Now, the software doesn't have a function where it stops. It can just continue predicting and it won't stop. And so does that mean after, if you set a threshold that the model, the AI system should stop calculating at some point? Or are they using the output that is beyond that point where it might not be, I think just like our general vision. A lot of us, we can see up clearly, like in front of us to a certain interval. But if we're looking miles and miles away, it's going to get blurrier as our eye goes down. So is that the same for this output? If it doesn't have a stop feature, that these formulas or these output, these confidence scores, they just keep going and going and going. I mean, I don't know if that's regression. Does regression mean the data becomes less accurate, and are they using it past that point? All right, so clustering, grouping similar data points together based on their characteristics. Dimensionality reduction, retaining the most meaningful features of the data while eliminating redundant or less informative ones. Oh, read deeply. This is a interesting comment. Predictions are quintessentially not facts. Yes, I think we should remember that when we're being cautious about DNA, because I think they're basically talking about predicted outcome. Just be cautious of it. Okay. Image and video recognition. Analyzing and understanding visual data such as object detection, facial recognition, identification, and classification of blood stains, sperm cells, and image captioning. Anomaly detection, identifying unusual patterns or outliers in data, which can be valuable for fraud detection, fault diagnosis, and detecting anomalies in sensor data. Now, this part interests me a lot, because just like a medical device is audited, I think, like same as like somebody would go and fill up a vending machine to make sure it's actually working, to fill it up with all of the drinks and snacks it needs. Somebody does go every so often and they service the medical equipment. And they can run different tests on it, and they know when to sunset it, when, it's run its course, and each medical equipment might be measuring something different. One could be measuring brain waves, one could be measuring the heartbeat, any other function that medical equipment can measure. There is an audit that goes on there to make sure that it's continually outputting correct data so your care team and your physician can read it. I do think a lot of these AI assisted systems, they should have a function like that, just like medical equipment, and so that they can run auditing. And I don't know if those policies are fully developed. I think there are some organizations that are working on that. Some organizations take that more seriously than others, but that's with every industry. Oh, Written Dreams, hello and welcome. Okay, this one I did want to learn more about: the natural language processing, understanding and processing human language. That's important for machine learning, to understand different languages and what things mean. Okay. So classification, data classification is usually performed by a supervised learning method and requires an annotated data set for efficient training. The resulting model would be a function that determines which of the predefined groups the new data will be assigned to. In addition, the likelihood of belonging to each group can also be calculated. The classification models can be binary, where the data is divided into two groups, such as a true signal versus noise, allele versus stutter. So allele, I think, is the peak that they're looking for, because they want to make sure you have the same alleles as the source profile, like the source profile. They want to run to see how similar it is to the suspect's profile. And so I think when they're injecting dye into, I don't understand all the biology. I just understand like the basics of, what the policy is, general ways that they run their laboratories, and, some terms. So at some point they do inject dye, and they have to figure out, and I think they put that's the electrophoresis, where they want to see if there's a true signal or if it's noise. Noise is just, it's not data that it's not a true allele. That, because when you're looking at it, because you're looking at these very small things, sometimes a piece of dust could get on there and people can confuse that for an allele. Or a piece of dirt or anything that's like a debris. because when you're looking at things that small, there can be other things that are not actually true biology, from how I understand it. Okay, and then they have STR locus versus flanking sequence, and so on. In other cases, non-binary models are able to classify into multiple categories by assessing their best fit to one of the several groups. An example of such a classification approach is handwriting text recognition and interpretation. So this graph is an illustration of linear classification into groups, where predetermined annotation is represented by a red star and blue diamond labeled data points, which turn functions of two variables, one quantified on the horizontal axis and the other quantified on the vertical axis. Yeah, this is another one of those things I read. I don't understand exactly everything, you know, in these scholarly journals, but I do like to understand the system, the process. How is invisible DNA moving through these softwares? How is it read? What are the kind of factors they put in there? What kind of terms do they use to define what is happening to the either, I guess, not the physical biology part of the invisible DNA, but also its digital representation? How does that move through the system? Okay. So I'm going to move down here because a lot of that is very technical, and we already went over kind of the general overview where they describe what these issues with machine learning are, and then they're going into them in very technical terms. So I think let's skip down here. All right, this one. Yeah, I think that's enough of that. Okay, I think I do want to read this because this gets into the other thing that I saw further down. So, generative models, by combining various methods of machine learning, it is possible to build more complex models which could be used to analyze a variety of incoming information and on this basis predict not only the class of an object or specific value of a parameter, but create a comprehensive model of a system. This approach is generally known as deep learning. On the surface, right, deep learning looks inconspicuous, it looks straightforward, but that actually, means something else in the AI world. So, deep learning, um, it predicts not only the class of an object or specific value of a parameter, but it does create a comprehensive model of a system. Not even sure how they do that, but that's what it's doing. So it falls under the umbrella of machine learning and is inspired by the structure and functionality of the human brain, with the aim of creating intelligent machines capable of making independent decisions. Yeah. So deep learning methods utilize variations of a hierarchical layered organization of artificial neurons with connections to other neurons similar to the brain structure. These neurons pass a signal to the other neurons based on the received input, a process that can be repeated multiple times, which ultimately creates a complex network capable of intuitive learning, an artificial neural network. That is one of those abbreviations, ANN, from the very top where they went through all of their abbreviations. So ANN is an artificial neural network, and that has to do with deep learning and generative models. So Oh. So, Lucy, are you saying that it's not a coincidence that the University of Idaho is researching a lot of this stuff? Interesting. So, a major demonstration of deep learning occurred in 2016 when AlphaGo computer program developed by DeepMind Technologies based on a deep neural network defeated Lee Sedol in 4 games of Go. Lee won 1 game. Until this point, it was thought that AI would not be able to beat Go, world champion, because the landscape of the potential moves was so great and because intuition was considered necessary to win. Previously, in 1997, the Deep Blue supercomputer, IBM, had beaten chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov using brute force computation. But AlphaGo was an example of true deep machine learning. Okay. Okay. And so generative models, a subfield of deep learning, often incorporated layered networks that utilize multiple layers of nonlinear data processing to extract and transform features of interest. What? I'm sure this is another one of those code terms. Non-linear data processing to extract and transform features of interest. I guess maybe that's part of the question they're asking. One popular example is the Generative Adversarial Network, GANs. The key innovation behind GANs is their 2-network architecture, which consists of a generator network and a discriminator network. The generator creates synthetic data, and the discriminator evaluates whether the data is real or fake, leading to a competitive training process where the generator becomes increasingly skilled at producing highly realistic data and exemplified below. These models are highly versatile and can combine both supervised and unsupervised learning methods in a single model as reviewed elsewhere. That is very interesting. So I think we're getting into the minute mechanics of one grain of salt of what goes on and how the machine learns. Okay. So these GANs, generative adversarial networks, they've been proven a power approach in reliable results of predictive tasks of a diverse nature. So one such task is, this is the part where I really wanted to get into. This is I think the part where we're going to connect with here a lot. So one such task is routinely deciphered in many fields, including forensic science, is pattern recognition. For instance, this approach can be used for artificial aging in individuals' photographs or biological age prediction from a facial image. And immediately when I read that, I thought, oh, are these 3D markups of if a child goes missing, they'll have a 3D generated image of the biological age that they would be today, that they are also machine learning to be able to generate those images. So that's predictive software, is how they predict what the child would look like, their biological age from when they went missing. So here we go. Forensic molecular phenotyping in general, and the problem of predicting the external visual appearance from a DNA sample in particular is another forensic application of the generative machine learning approach. These characteristics can include physical traits such as eye color, hair color, skin color, and even facial morphology. One of the most intriguing applications of generative machine learning in forensic science is the prediction of an individual's facial appearance from a DNA sample. I'm going to read that again. In forensic science, the prediction of an individual's facial appearance from a DNA sample. This task is exceptionally challenging due to the complex relationship between genetic and epigenetic factors and facial traits. Given the relatively limited knowledge of the underlying genetic architecture, craniofacial morphology coupled with complex task of phenotyping facial traits, generative machine learning models, particularly deep neural networks, may offer a promising solution. This approach leads to more accurate predictions of complex variables such as facial traits, iteratively defined as generated output. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this graph here. So what interests me there and what my ears popped up is the thing with the missing child example is usually there's a picture, or if it is like a Jane Doe from a cold case, I wonder if this type of facial recognition is used. So now are they using it in criminal investigations where they are developing a DNA profile from trace DNA and they're able to make a 3D mock-up of the features, their genetics, like genetic genealogy of what this person might look like, what are the genes, and that kind of thing. So it says here, this illustration of proposed GAN's approach for predicting complex phenotyping traits from genomic data. Briefly, this complex process can be described as follows. Data collection. To train a deep neural network for facial appearance prediction, a data set is collected. The data set includes both genetic data, DNA samples, and corresponding 2D, 3D facial images of thousands of individuals. The genetic data provide the input to the model, and the images represent the target output, the individual's facial appearance. Now, from my understanding, facial recognition, I thought, was a two-way process, right? You would have, say, a still from a security camera, and then the police would run that through their facial recognition software. But I think they're retrofitting this when they're finding DNA samples at the crime scene. Then they're putting that data into whatever software, their AI predictive software that they have, and they could potentially make a 3D composite of whatever that person looks like with their genetic data, with the trace DNA found at a crime scene. Now, that still doesn't get around that presence equals guilt, because it doesn't. You can find that DNA profile, you can make that 3D model, but that still doesn't mean that person was at the crime scene, especially when we're talking about trace DNA. So feature extraction. The deep neural network employs multiple layers of artificial neurons to extract relevant features from the genetic data. These features could be related to genetic or epigenetic variations and other factors that contribute to facial traits. Training process. The network is trained using a large data set of genetic data and facial images. During training, the network learns to map genetic information to facial features. This process is guided by images in the training set, allowing the network to make predictions about individuals' facial appearance based on their DNA. Now, if they are doing this, if I understand this right, and I could be wrong, where they are taking a DNA sample from a crime scene, they are putting that information into their software, which is making a 3D mock-up, and that is one AI assisted system. Then do they have another AI assisted system that's scanning social media? And then those two AI assisted systems are communicating. So they have the source DNA and they made their 3D image. And then the output of another AI system gives a score, of how confident it is that whoever is on the social media, after all of that large volume data is collected, that the model might be able to match a face to someone's face on social media, because a lot of times we have multiple angles of our face. And so in that way, that is also two-way. It's very similar but different to the example I proposed earlier, where maybe they have a still image of somebody on a security camera, and then they're putting it in their facial recognition software. But in this particular, I think they're putting trace DNA into an AI-assisted system where it's predicting what this person could look like. And then that AI system is communicating with another system that collects all of these photos from social media, and then it gives a confidence score, of 81%, 37%. So, I mean, at any point, what if the police pick an image that is 27% confident? They probably aren't going to give us the confidence score, but they can say this was a lead, and we can be confident because it was one of the output. So if one of the output of whatever it is, whatever AI assisted system it is, how much weight does law enforcement and the state experts put into the output? And if it is a lower confidence score, however the AI assisted system gets to that, how are they describing that output in court? Because if we are going to trust the AI and however they were programmed with whatever data they have, if it is a bias system, if they're targeting different races, I mean, we don't know how it's learned, but let's just say, okay, we accept this confidence score. Well, how do they describe that in court? Could it easily have been somebody else who has a score of 37%? We just don't know what kind of weight or how the law enforcement or the state experts, how they're weighting this type of evidence to communicate to us. Okay, so the training process. The network is trained using a large data set of genetic data and facial images. During training, the network learns to map genetic information to facial features. This process is guided by images and training data set, allowing the network to make predictions about an individual's facial appearance based on their DNA. This process is guided by the images in the training data set, allowing the network to make predictions about an individual's facial appearance based on their DNA. So this is what I have. Yes, we have genetic genealogy, right? What if this is another form of it, one that they don't talk about? So they're doing the genetic genealogy, they're developing a SNP, and they're doing the Ancestry.com, 23andMe. They're using all of those documents to kind of match up and make a family tree. But what if they're also doing this? They're creating our faces from the DNA at a crime scene, And I think they're using trace DNA to do it. But the problem is, yeah, you can do all this stuff, but how do you know that person was actually there? Okay, here's the discriminator feedback. One of the key elements in generative models is the discriminator, which assesses the quality of the generated output. In this case, the discriminator acts as a classifier that evaluates how well the predicted facial features match the actual images in the dataset. The neural network iteratively refines the predictions by learning the discriminator's feedback. Generating facial predictions. Once the network is trained, it can take a new questioned DNA sample as input and generate predictions about the individual's facial appearance. These predictions can include the shape of the face, the size of facial features, and other visible traits. The potential applications of this technology in forensic science are significant. For example, it could be used to create composite images of suspects based on DNA evidence left at a crime scene or reconstruct the facial appearance of a person based on partial skeletal remains, helping in the identification process. Now, I do want to say, I'm not against this. I think that for cold cases, for John and Jay Does that you can't identify, this is great, especially if there are photos of them, before they go missing or they have those on file. My problem with this is when it runs into trace DNA. That you're taking their genetic data, which some may argue that is health data, and they're building a profile based on someone who may have never been at the crime scene. And on a maybe. Okay, let's maybe put this together. This person maybe was present. But, with blood DNA, okay, you could argue that person had to have been there when the blood spilled. Okay, that is a little bit more reasonable, all right? But for secondary transfer, or even if it is primary transfer, but that primary transfer event didn't happen during crime time, I have a big problem with this. And as we know, we do have a biased system. And so, of course, the state is probably just going to mix all of that together because law enforcement, the state, forensic DNA experts, and tech companies, they're all about presence equals guilt. And if we continue thinking that trace DNA works like blood DNA, I believe jurors are going to continue to wrongfully convict. Now, if we have, we're allowed to know some of this stuff. So, I think that kind of levels the playing field a little bit if we are kind of in the loop of what they're doing, and that we can kind of say, okay, they might be stretching the science on this a little bit. I'd like to know more about how they actually came to this. What are the work politics? What are the politics in the workplace? Is it biased? Are these numbers a little inflated? Was there another profile that was actually closer? And if these profiles are very close, or if these facial images are close, could it have been actually another family member? Would we convict the wrong family member from the wrong branch? So this does have its positives, but in the wrong hands, it could be abused. Okay, so while this field is still in its early stages, the power of generative machine learning offers exciting possibilities for forensic science. It highlights the potential of AI and deep learning to provide valuable insights and predictions from genetic data, ultimately aiding in investigation and solving complex cases. Okay, so it highlights the potential of AI and deep learning to provide valuable insights and predictions from genetic data, ultimately aiding in investigations and solving complex cases. So what if in the Brian Koberger case, they made a partial tree because they retroactively created a 3D composite of whatever DNA they had, and we don't know that system. We don't know how accurate it is. We don't know what kind of data it worked with. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is right, but I think it's something maybe we should think about. Maybe they didn't go the typical ancestry route that we are all used to, with the military documents, the birth certificates, the death certificates, marriage certificates, those types of documents that could support, a family tree that is more traditional on an ancestry website, where I do think this is an offshoot of that. Um, and it can be good, but I just worry about trace DNA, the possibility of secondary transfer, even if it was a primary transfer. Did that happen at crime time? I think this all needs a lot of caution. Okay, so okay, and then it goes into some of the benefits, but I think we kind of so from aiding decision making and forecasting to enabling personalized experiences and automation, machine learning stands as a transformative force in modern research and technological advancement. Embracing and harnessing the potential of machine learning will undoubtedly play a pivotal role in shaping the future of science inquiry and problem solving. Now, there's no way for the court to translate AI assisted systems, because a lot of them can be very complicated. As we kind of read through, we got into a little bit of the technical stuff. We kind of got lost in the weeds a little bit. But, I think we understand the gist of this article. And so, like, how do you translate that into an archaic system? Like, so, and until it is, I think law enforcement, state experts, and tech companies, I do believe they have an advantage, because they can't really, they're going to use this, how we found terms that actually mean something else, like predictive models. That means they use like an AI model. So they have um, indicating terms. So they're not, I don't think they're going to necessarily say, yeah, we used AI while they're in court, because the court doesn't know how to handle it. And until we have a language for it in the courtroom, all of these things are being considered leads. So you're going to have state of the art technology that we have no idea how it was processed, created, and they're just going to say it was a lead. But what does a jury do with that? Okay, so, and then they have these black boxes where each of these tech companies, they have their own way of how they come to conclusions. They have their own way that they build their AI models and their agents, and they just have their own way of doing things. And they don't want to release that, because that's like their work product. They don't want other tech companies to do it in the way that they do it. And so a lot of it we may never know because of these black boxes, for one. And two, it's like, of course, the court is going to ask, how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come by that information? And all of them are just going to say it was a lead, it was a tip. And I guess essentially it was a tip from AI output, but it's like we don't have policy or even terms or even the political structure of how it works in their work environment. How are they placing meaning onto these tips, these leads? So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting, because this could be, and I'm not saying it is, another angle of genetic genealogy. Could have some of this happened in the Brian Koberger case, where it wasn't as straightforward as genealogy as maybe we were led to believe. There was more of this stuff going on. I found this so fascinating because I read articles all the time. This one made me think, what if? And I don't think it's the out there, because that's exactly what they want to do. Like, there is this push, there is momentum to take trace DNA from crime scenes, and they want to put it all through their AI fun toys. Well, AI can be fun, but it has to be used with respect, restraint. It's different from other electronics we may have, and there should be limits on it. Right. Lucy says there is nothing more personal than your genetic code, than your DNA. I would agree, and I think this is borderline. This is getting close to health data, and apparently, health data is defined as something else than a possible trace DNA mixture that you may or may not have actually been present at a crime scene during the time of the crime. You could potentially be reading into genetic data, creating 3D composites from trace DNA of innocent people, because all trace DNA is maybe. So, yeah, there's a possibility you're unnecessarily going through this process for someone who doesn't have anything to do with the crime or during crime time. And also, with these types of AI system programming, they also need regular maintenance, just like a medical device. And like, who's measuring the data, and how is it serviced? If there comes into a problem, like if a medical device breaks or it's acting a little weird, it might get serviced so that it can be put back, on the floor, or it could be sunset. So another problem is the over-reliance on machine learning algorithms as a substitute for human judgment. There's a lot of going on in the healthcare world about how doctors are now going to make decisions if, they're also using AI algorithms. So, it's not like an AI shouldn't diagnose you, with conditions. That it should always be a doctor, no matter what tools they're using. But how do we know law enforcement, state experts, and tech companies are looking at it through that lens? Or are they letting all of this data output kind of control a case? And maybe this is one of the reasons why there really wasn't an investigation in the IDAHO4 in the Brian Koberger case, because AI already came up with their answer. So they just had to go through the motions. And AI doesn't always get it right. Like, yeah, you have powerful technology. Yes, you technically can do the process, but does that actually reflect what happened that night? Lucy, BK Ultra. We come up with this stuff. It's so funny. So, moreover, the potential lack of transparency can undermine the validity of acceptability of the results produced by the machine learning algorithms, particularly in legal context, where forensic evidence is often used to support court decisions. The problem is known as the black box issue. We just went over that a couple of minutes ago. In support, in this context, explainable AI is a critical area of research that aims to develop machine learning algorithms that are transparent and interpretable. Explainable AI refers to the ability of an AI system to provide explanations for its decisions so that human experts can understand the underlying reasoning and have confidence in the accuracy and reliability of the results. Several techniques have been proposed to improve the transparency of machine learning algorithms, including decision trees, rule based models, and the Bayesian networks. These models are transparent and interpretable, allowing human experts to understand the decision making process and validate the results produced by the algorithms. So, as machine learning continues to permeate various fields, it is essential to recognize that these methods are not infallible and may produce erroneous results if not appropriately handled. The inherent weakness and pitfalls of machine learning can significantly impact decision making and the reliability of outcomes, making it imperative for researchers to navigate these limitations cautiously. By addressing these challenges in the scientific community can work towards enhancing the transparency and robustness of machine learning techniques, ensuring their responsible and effective deployment. Right. Now, the next part is specifically for DNA interpretation. Yeah. So, machine learning applications in forensic DNA analysis. Application of machine learning methods can be especially beneficial for the field of DNA analysis. Continuous advancement in high throughput genomic technologies, such as massively parallel DNA sequencing, coupled with improved algorithms for bioinformatic data and analysis, lead to accumulation of complex genetic data. These data require extensive processing and annotation, a natural application for machine learning. In fact, machine learning approaches are used to solve numerous problems in genetics and genomics, such as generating genomic annotations, predicting functional genomic elements, understanding mechanisms of gene expression, and other problems requiring complex analysis of large and often unstructured data sets for a comprehensive review. Oh, see this source below. Okay, so this is another one. Parallel DNA sequencing. That could also be a keyword or like a hidden term for an AI assisted system. Okay. Lucy Morningstar says bioinformatics and computational biology. Martin Nowak, Harvard. In an effort to describe the evolution of human language, he designed a mathematical approach bringing together formal linguistics, learning theory, and evolutionary dynamics. Yeah, that is a concern. Like, how are they going to communicate all of this, what they're doing? I'm afraid they might use like neuro-linguistic programming. Like, or are they going to be straightforward in how they do this, or are they using different techniques? You know, like bridging together formal linguistics, learning theory, and evolutionary dynamics. All right, so forensic science is a multidisciplinary field that analyzes and draws conclusions from numerous sources of highly variable, multidimensional data. Forensic analysts are expected to base their data interpretation on extensive professional knowledge, experience, and rigid standards with zero bias involved in their decisions. This task, however, is challenging as biological data can be extremely complex and diverse. It includes human and non-human DNA markers, STRs, SNPs, and microhaplotypes used for identity and investigative purposes. RNA markers, mRNA, and microRNA used for confirmation of the biological tissue of origin. Epigenetic markers used for biological age estimation and biological tissue of origin, and even protein markers, which can be used as a proxy for genetic identification. Each of these markers include numerous inherent and often hidden variables, patterns, and artifacts requiring powerful software to thoroughly train specialists for data analysis and interpretation. Now, see, again, I think they probably, that whatever they're doing here is heavily reliant on software. Oh, Lucy says Martin Nowak. I'm probably not pronouncing his last name correctly. This is his framework is the foundation. So evolution of cooperation. Nowak proposed this cooperation is the third fundamental principle of evolution, alongside mutation and natural selection. Okay. Thanks for that, Lucy. So even though they say these forensic scientists are basing their DNA interpretation on extensive professional knowledge, but now your profession has almost turned into an AI assisted program. So like now are we sure that they understand the software and all the things that come with relying on software to be able to make decisions? Like, how do we write the ethics to bridge that gap? Okay, so in many cases, the analysis of generated data requires complex mathematics and or a large number of calculations, which are not feasible, even possible, without computational support. There you go. A lot of this analysis and the new way to interpret data, you need computation support, which is AI assisted systems. So no longer, so are humans going to be feeding data? That's their role now, feeding data to these systems, because now the decisions and the information that, law enforcement, state experts, and, what these tech companies, the AI assisted system has to do all the work. How are humans making decisions? In forensic science for DNA interpretation, if they're not really part of the process, especially for trace DNA. Invisible DNA is 100% reliant on well, no, not 100, but they're inputting data and that's about it. Okay, so the computational methods allow inclusion of an increased number of both qualitative and quantitative factors, leading to creation of increasingly intricate models that often stray beyond the practical reach of analysis. Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Is this a human in the loop process anymore? The data generated in such diverse applications must meet several conditions prior to incorporation into a learning computational pipeline. One of the essential conditions for efficient learning is the size of the training set, which is expected to be significantly larger than the number of specific features, alleles, calls versus artifacts. So if you've watched and followed a lot of my work, I talk about allele calls, where if you even have a lab with 5 or 6 DNA analysts, they might all come to a different conclusion because, the standards are not the same across the nation about how they're able to call things. So one analyst could say, oh, this is an exclusion, or one person or one analyst could say this is the inclusion. Somebody could say inconclusive, and then someone could say this is not interpretable. And so there are disagreements of where you place those thresholds, and the thresholds are placed in different places, in different labs, and in even the thresholds you use depending on your software, just like the Maddie Mogan example with the DNA under her hands, that came down to thresholds and standards between STR mix and true allele. Apparently, Westray agreed true allele was the proper way to read that data set, and so he agreed with the defense that Brian Koberger was excluded from the DNA under Maddie's nails. So yeah, so these thresholds, they're not even the same with different software. And so when you're looking at allele calls versus artifacts, artifacts could be dust that might look like a small allele, or a piece of debris, something that is not true biological material. Sometimes they can be called as a true allele when it's actually not. And so some of these trace DNA samples, they may or may not be accurate depending on, the extensive experience and knowledge of these lab analysts. But are lab analysts even a part of loop anymore? Because you have somebody who's training the machine learning. Is that different? Yeah, there's the initial machine learning to have your AI assisted system up and running for actual real use, but then who is actually inputting the data? Is that another trained person in AI learning to get it to learn whatever your question is, like who belongs to this DNA profile, or is that going to continually be a DNA forensic analyst? So I think our roles and our job roles and functions are changing a little. Maybe I don't even know what parts of the DNA interpretation will be left for the human analysts. So data generated in such diverse applications must meet several conditions prior to incorporation into a learning computational pipeline. One of the essential conditions for efficient learning is the size of a training set, which is expected to be significantly larger than the number of specific features. Okay, we read that. Allele calls versus artifacts to be extracted. This is necessary to mitigate against the risk of overfitting. This is the risk of overmatching, stretching the science, saying a match is closer than it is, saying a match is a match when it's not, stretching the math to fit. Sometimes, however, it might be necessary to reduce the dimensionality of the data set by extracting the most informative features, which allows more efficient use of computer algorithms. In most cases, the data requires extensive processing, labeling, for a more efficient classification versus supervised learning. Okay. Oh, here we go. Current applications for machine learning and forensic biology can be arbitrarily divided into applications related to human identification, such as efficient designation of STR alleles from either the capillary electrophoresis or the next generation sequencing generated data, while filtering for potential artifacts and assisting with DNA mixture interpretation, such as estimating the number of contributors to a DNA mixture. All right, listen to this one carefully. Applications related to forensic intelligence, such as forensic molecular phenotyping and biogeographic ancestry prediction. Biogeographic ancestry prediction. Is this another one of those key terms where this is different than actually building a family tree with documents? Is this a step in the process of when you develop a 3D composite from a trace DNA profile of someone who may or may not have been there during crime time? So then are they trying to find out the location of your ancestry, because all we've really heard from this Brian Koberger case was, yeah, somewhere in Pennsylvania or New York. That's where the family was from. Okay, but did you actually do the family tree, or are you following a different process? That's my question. All right, application number 3. Applications related to increasing the evidential value of DNA evidence, such as forensic microbiology, postmortem interval estimation, biological tissue, source confirmation, and activity level reporting. Okay, so postmortem interval, I think, is the estimation between the time somebody died and the time, I think, what is it? A health professional is there, or when they actually, time of death. I think it's slightly more nuanced than the general label of time of death. It's the postmortem interval estimation. I actually have a live where I go through what that actually means and how it could relate to the Brian Koberger case. Now, when they say it increases evidentiary value of DNA evidence through biological tissue source confirmation, I guess the machine learning can predict whether it's a skin cell, and we have different skin cells. We have different skin cells in our mouth than we do on our arm, our epidermis, or whether it's sweat, semen, saliva. They want to confirm what type of source it is. Now, in the Brian Koberger case, they never tested item 1.1, the dust from the sheath. They never tested that for source. So we don't even know if it is skin cells. We don't know what it is. I don't even know if they could tell. And then this last one here is one that I have been talking about, I don't know, for years, called activity level reporting. So activity level is the suspect did the criminal activity versus the suspect did an alternate activity. That's where it comes in, where a lot of times it would be trace DNA, where there's presence of the trace DNA, but we don't know if that person was actually present. So your activity level, okay, did the person do the criminal activity? Did the person do the alternate activity? Alternate activity would mean, I guess, your DNA is present, but you were doing something else. Whether that it's sleeping in your bed, you just weren't there during crime time. Okay, and there are, I think, seven activity levels. I think I might have a video on that too, but that's the main one. Did the suspect do the criminal activity, or did the suspect do an alternate activity? So that is the question they're asking with activity level. So even if it is primary, secondary transfer, that person may have never been present. And so that's the question, that's the process that they go through, the activity level propositions, to kind of come to a closer conclusion of what was the activity? What activity did you do? So I guess machine learning is going to help with that too, which just be cautious. So considering the relatively large variety of machine learning applications in forensic DNA analysis, this literature review, and specifically section 2, focuses on applications for human identification only. Okay, so the process of STR genotyping and the data interpretation consists of numerous steps, including separation of signals from different colored channels, identification of all peaks that are present in a electropherogram, sizing DNA fragments. So if you noticed in the forensic report from the Idaho State Forensic Lab, the sample labeled Q1.1 and all the other ones, Q1.2, Q1.3, Q1.4, they had an ILS failure, which means the sizing mechanism of the software wasn't able to size. They weren't able to measure. That's like the ruler. So that had failed when they were testing that. So they weren't able, not only were they not able to read it, they couldn't read the plate. Their standards failed. And they also had to requant and re-inject. So they were troubleshooting all of, well, Q1.1 is basically, because that's the one they went with, they had to troubleshoot it even to read it. And they weren't able to do the sizing DNA fragments on the first try. Okay, so designated allele calls at each locus, removing artifacts, and subsequently designing a DNA profile for further interpretation, or designating. Excuse me. Okay, so now, if machine learning can help with designating allele calls at each locus, why does the sample that's labeled Q1.1 and in parentheses keyboard on the paternity test have 3 alleles at 11 different loci? That is not a genetic anomaly. A genetic anomaly might appear at 1 or 2 loci, which means 1 or 2 loci would have the 3 alleles, not 11. So the profile that's labeled Q1.1 in parentheses keyboard and the paternity test is a mixture. How would you ever know that person is the father if there's another person's DNA in there? But there's lots of problems with that paternity test. So that's another example of calling alleles at each locus, because there's 3 present on 11. In 11 locations, there's 3 alleles present, which indicates there's more than one person's DNA there. Removing artifacts and subsequently designing a DNA profile for further interpretation. The complexity of separating the alleles from background noise and artifacts is the basic problem in forensic DNA analysis, and that's exactly what happens when you're analyzing dust, debris, and mixtures of human DNA. So how do you separate the dust and the debris to be able to read the mixture of DNA that you have? So currently, the process of STR genotyping is carried out in a semi-automatic manner using dedicated expert software such as GeneMapper, which Idaho's forensic lab did use. That's the one they used. From my understanding, they used an older version of it. The software separates allelic peaks from noise and artifacts with the help of built-in algorithms and utilizes a number of validated thresholds. This process subsequently results in a designated DNA profile, even though they couldn't read Q1.1 on the first try. Although manual confirmation by an analyst is required. The resulting DNA profile can be used for comparison with a reference profile for further analysis with probabilistic genotyping software. The majority of published studies in this niche undertook a similar approach. Briefly, the proposed machine learning methods make no priori assumptions and rely almost entirely on the raw EPG data and generate a model, while eliminating the data analysis threshold, which are used in contemporary STR profiling, instead of using static analytical and stochastic thresholds. They utilize either a dynamic threshold or refrain from applying any thresholds altogether. The proponents of this approach presume that application of a static threshold is too conservative and may lead to significant loss of value of information. Allelic peaks could be reduced if using dynamic threshold or no thresholds at all. In other words, the platform agnostic algorithms are designed to utilize all available information, the raw data, to learn and make informed predictions, thus maximizing the information obtained from the DNA evidence. So, traditionally, the decision on setting interpretation thresholds is based on extensive validation using a variety of samples and a particular piece of analytical equipment, i.e., genetic analyzer. In the traditional approach, the signals below such thresholds, below AT, below the analytical threshold, are considered unreliable due to inherent limitations of any analytical system and discarded. The approach helps to minimize a situation when artifacts are labeled as allele peaks or true peaks are discarded. Most forensic DNA laboratories use a series of validated static thresholds which aim to avoid type 1 errors. Designating an artifactual peak as an allele and minimize type 2 errors, incorrectly classifying true peaks as artifacts, as recommended by Swigdam. Traditionally, the possibility of detecting false positives, type 1 error is considered a more consequential error in forensic science, as it may lead to false inclusion and wrongful conviction. The application of more conservative static threshold and especially analytical threshold minimize the occurrence of type 1 error at the expense of the type 2 error. On the other hand, the use of more variation sensitive dynamic threshold reduces the possibility of losing essential allelic information, considering an enhanced sensitivity of modern STR kits and genotyping technologies. It is important to rigorously validate proposed dynamic threshold methods to ensure at least equal performance, including concordance to existing methods, especially with trace DNA samples. So this is the thing. So there's a line called the analytical threshold, or whatever threshold they were talking about in here, static threshold, dynamic threshold. It's a line where you stop detecting, the data because you don't think the data, I guess you're looking at a graph and there's a line. Anything below the line, they don't really consider. It's anything above the line. And each lab has a different threshold. It's exactly what happened in the Maddie example of 13.1. Now, and this was a question that Stephen Mercer had at the DNA hearing, because he said, we do need this genetic IgG information. And we also want to know if there's any low-lying mixtures. That is a great question, because that would, if we had data for that, which we might, that would tell us if Q1.1 or item 1.1, the dust they found on the sheath, was actually a mixture, because the confidence in that DNA sample should come way down. And as we could see, whatever profile, the Q1.1 with keyboard in parentheses on the paternity test, that is a mixture. So is that profile truly a low-lying mixture? Was the mixture underneath wherever they set their threshold? And where was that threshold? Could it still be considered a mixture, a mini mixture, at another lab with different standards, a different threshold? How did they stress test this? Can another lab or another analyst repeat the test that they did? Now, even if there is a low-lying mixture, that still means it's a mixture. And so they have more chances to pull out a profile that, is closely the suspect. So consequently, it is important that machine learning models, which do not incorporate any thresholds, should be validated to demonstrate concordance with the traditional threshold-based models. In the following paragraphs, we will give a more detailed overview of the studies that have utilized either dynamic threshold, static threshold, or NT, or their combination approach to improve contemporary human ID methods. Okay. So we went over the traditional way, and I think the DNA under Maddie's nails is a great example to kind of give you a visual of what the traditional way, that from how I understand it, is what they do. This is going to go over what the machine learning does, I guess. yeah, the generated data. So STR genotyping using the capillary electropherogram generated data. Pull-ups are among the most common technical artifacts of the capillary electropherogram process. These artifactual peaks can be observed when there is a partial overlap between the wavelength windows of two or more fluorescent dyes, used to label and detect amplified STR fragments. The majority of these artifacts are zeroed by a spectral calibration mechanism during pre-run calibration of the capillary electrophoresis system. Some, however, may remain and challenge DNA profile interpretation, especially mixed samples with minor contributors. Currently, the routine approach to detect and remove pull-ups is by manually inspecting the electropherogram, the raw data. This method, however, is time-consuming and not always accurate. All right. A possible solution to this problem has been offered in a recent study by Edelman. The authors describe a method for automatic detection and removal of fluorescent pull-ups that does not require prior removal of the technical or biological artifacts. The proposed computational pipeline utilizes a symbolic regression model that is applied to the raw electropherogram data. In order to identify the candidate variables for building a model, the data were first filtered with a static analytical threshold of 10 RFU, followed by either a dynamic locus or specific threshold. Subsequently, 3 more quantitative fillers were applied, resulting in removal of all expected allele and stutter peaks, leaving only the artifactual peaks caused by pull-ups. This is all trace DNA. That's what they're reading. They're reading the stutter peaks. They're reading stochastic effects. They're trying to read if it's a true allele or an artificial artifact peak. Like that's the process for trace DNA. I don't think that's the process for blood DNA. So the DNA that they are talking about here is all trace, in my opinion. Because trace is, I think it's completely different. It interacts with software differently because a lot of it is dependent on it for any conclusions to be made, any confidence scores, any output. So quite expectedly, peak height was found to be the most significant variable influencing pull-up frequency, while both the dye and the type of capillary electropherogram instrument were also found to be insignificant features. Accordingly, a direct relationship between the height of a pull-up peak and its removal accuracy was observed. The higher the peak, the more accurately it was trimmed by an algorithm. Now, okay, so the algorithm is affecting what they're looking at. And from what I was reading before, a lot of the software predicts what should be there, and they predict what is there that shouldn't be there. So they have, I guess, a setting or a measurement in there that can predict the reliability of the drop in and the drop out. Because if you have a mixture or a partial, you could have alleles from another contributor fall into the sample that you're trying to read. So then there will be majority of one contributor and a partial of another contributor, which is making it a little difficult for you to pull out what is the accurate, where do you draw the line? What are the true DNA profiles in this mixture? And of course, when you have drop in and drop out, depending if some of the alleles that dropped out actually belong to the bigger profile, and then you fill it in with the other alleles that are there from the other profile, you're essentially merging a profile that has two or more contributors, and you're saying, oh, this is one DNA profile. Because it's that soup analogy where you can have alphabet soup and you can have a string of letters and you can spell different words with it, but is that the actual word? And some of the words might use, the same letters, but that word or that person's name, however you spell it, may not have been there during crime time. Gerald asked an excellent question. Thank you for asking this, Gerald. How is that admissible? Now, the thing is, the admissibility rules, they were created, and the public wasn't even in the loop. So I don't know what admissibility rules there are. And especially with machine learning and the AI assisted systems, and sometimes just black box, whatever software these tech companies are using, there may not be an admissibility rule written for it. A lot of this is bottlenecking because I do think a lot of this technology is being used, but there isn't any language to translate into that archaic justice system. And so, even though law enforcement, state forensic experts, and these companies are using this advanced technology, all they can do is boil most of this stuff down into two words. It was a lead or a tip. And that is how this technology is entering our court system, which we know that a lot of this is a lot more complicated than the word tip or the word lead. But as of right now, the judicial system doesn't have a place for any of this. And this is why we need to be cautious until this bottleneck is resolved. This does get complicated. And, they're working on invisible DNA and they're saying they can do all these things with it, but that's not necessarily on the court record. So you can't check their work. I can't check their work. Do they have the accurate profile? Is the software they are relying on, what are their settings? If it is AI assisted, how did the machine learning work for it? What kind of data was entered? Because as we know now, there is a lot of bias in our system. Like, it's racially biased when it comes to conviction rates, suspect options. And so does all that bias, is that in the data that you trained your AI assisted system with? Because then you're bringing all the problems we currently have in our system and you're training an AI to be biased. Okay. So a lot of what they're talking about here for when the machine learning, like how data is generated from machine learning to create the STR, they're going into how, the problems with it, how it works, and how it's different. So let's move down here. It says fluorescent pull-ups, however, are not the only artifactual signals. Now, artifacts and artifactual signals is not biological material. That could be dust, debris, dirt. It's noise. It's the stuff that's there because you're looking at something so small, you're bound to have some other things that you can see besides the true allele, and sometimes you can't tell the difference because we're looking at things that are small. So it's saying here, fluorescent pull-ups, however, are not the only artificial signals commonly observed in electropherograms. Other common capillary electropherogram artifacts include electrical spikes, reverse and forward stutters, and background noise. A recent publication by Marciano et al. proposes a sophisticated machine learning approach for electrophoregram analysis intended to identify and remove such artifacts, except pull-ups, and subsequently yield a DNA profile. The authors of the study developed an quote unquote intelligent locus sample specific threshold and noise reducer. Wow, that's a long one. So that's abbreviated ILSST-NR. Okay, so they're applying a method, a threshold, a measurement with machine learning to a software, and we're not even sure how that works. So, containing 4 computational modules, the first module utilizes a locus and a sample-specific dynamic analytical threshold, which is calculated as 4 standard deviations above the mean of the background noise in the flanking regions of each locus, while a peak detection algorithm subsequently detects and removes artifacts such as pull-ups and spikes. So not only these predictive models, they're removing things they don't think they should be there, and they're predicting things that they think should be there. Now, that could be the right way to go. I don't know, but I think that's something to be cautious of. The second module employs algorithms that detect forward and reverse stutters based on user-defined thresholds. User-defined thresholds. There's where you get into each lab can set their own settings to the actual software. So the third module incorporates trimming algorithms designed to remove any additional background noise artifacts not detected by previous models. So this model will label some of the raw data as noise or artifacts. Did they actually label that correctly? Because they're going to remove that in the next step. They're going to remove anything that it labels a noise artifact. Now, if you have enough of this type of manipulation, enough of this prediction, and if it's not controlled and limited, and there's proper policy and there's transparency, how do we know that they're not moving or adding things to the profile where if you do a few of those things, maybe it doesn't affect the profile, but if you do a lot of those things, you're going to get a completely different profile, and it won't be an accurate representation of the surface it was found on or the object it was found on. So, while retaining potential low-level alleles, the fourth module incorporates SVM, predictive model, and it is the actual machine learning component of the system, designed to classify the data and remove remaining artifacts and extract the final DNA profile in each locus. See, it says right here, remove any remaining artifacts. So they're removing something that they believe shouldn't be there, and then they're extracting the final DNA. So they are essentially generating DNA profiles from software. The ILSSTRN-NR system has been trained with electrophoregram data that has been generated from 960 single source and mixed samples by 3 different capillary electrophoregram platforms. The model performance has been tested with 341 samples generated in the same manner as the training data set. Overall, the ILSST-NR system demonstrated better performance compared to the traditional static threshold methods, with overall accuracy of 92% for detecting true alleles and false positive rate of 0.8% for detecting artifacts. Conversely, 11% of the artifact peaks were designated as true alleles, which represented 0.079% of the total alleles detected. So here we go. You add information to your software and your machine learning, and then it's going to output these confidence scores, which is also accuracy. Now, we're not really sure how they came to those numbers. I mean, I guess it's a nice feature to have a measurement in there that's supposed to catch the false positives or even detect or give you a warning signal. This one might be a false positive, however the software actually works. But as you can see, they're throwing these percentages out. The main problem with this approach, according to the authors, is that the application successfully increased the number of interpretable alleles at the cost of calling an increased number of additional incorrect alleles compared to the static threshold methods. This problem seems to be mainly associated with mixed samples and specifically with low template contributors at the background noise level. Nevertheless, the proposed machine learning approach in conjunction with the dynamic threshold has outperformed the traditional static threshold method in terms of maintaining balance between retrieving the maximum information from the electropherogram data while minimizing the number of artifactual peaks that were erroneously called alleles. Yeah, there it goes. So they're still, as of 2024, having problems with the AI assisted system interpreting incorrect alleles. So they're still kind of troubleshooting this. Again, that was 2024. What was it, 2 years ago? So machine learning could, I don't know how fast it learns. So, I mean, this is just all something to be aware of because they are, they're massaging all of this invisible DNA data. They're doing a lot of sophisticated things to it, and we don't really understand. And so they're going to say, yeah, we got a lead, or we're confident in this profile, but how did you get to that profile? Are you sure it's right? I mean, you can't even see the material you're working with the naked eye. Okay, so then they go into more like technical stuff. I guess they're saying they need more data and training, of course. And then they want to develop validation for these types of processes. Okay, so then they're going to go into STR genotyping using the massively parallel sequencing data. Okay, that's another thing that they calculate. Oh, this is the SNP part. Some operational laboratories are already transitioning from traditional capillary electrophoresis fragment separation, especially for SNP genotyping. The computational methods designed for DNA sequencing, DNA analysis face similar problems to the capillary electrophoresis generated data. Although massive parallel sequencing data brings additional challenges. For example, massive parallel sequencing, abbreviated MPS, platforms generate a significantly larger amount of genomic data than the capillary electrophoresis genotyping methods. In addition, sequencing retrieves more comprehensive genomic information, the actual DNA sequence of the STR loci, including flanking regions, versus just the numbers of the tandem repeats. And as we've been told by many people in the case, that there's a lot more information in the SNP and SMP versus the STR. There are thousands upon thousands of regions for the SNP, and then there's a minimum amount for the STR. As a result, even more sophisticated bioinformatic tools are required to extract a DNA profile and resolve biological variants. Okay. So let me just go in more into that. They're referencing other studies and other articles here. One of the limitations developed software that It cannot correct sequencing errors or any sequence-specific artifacts such as homopolymer read errors. All right, so they're still like working out if the machine learning and the AI assisted system are these methods validated, just like the medical equipment example, where are you still measuring things that are accurate? Is it being serviced regularly? How can we trust these outputs? And it looks like in 2024 they were still trying to work that out. And they are trying to enhance the accuracy of allele calling in low template DNA mixtures. Low template samples, and particularly low template mixtures, pose challenges in forensic DNA analysis due to PCR artifacts and the difficulty of distinguishing minor contributors from noise products. Yeah, and there are some independent DNA forensic scientists who say you really shouldn't interpret profiles that have like 3 or more contributors, because then you run into that soup example where that alphabet soup where you have letters and you can arrange the letters in multiple orders and spell many people's name, but what is actually the actual correct name? And so the humans have trouble with that, but then they're saying machine learning has trouble with that, but they're optimistic that it won't in the future, and there's potential benefits. But again, we still don't know how did you come to these outputs? All right, so then they also say DNA mixture interpretation is the most difficult. All right. I think we all get the gist of this article here. Oh, we were right at the end. Okay, so let's read their conclusion and see what they have to say here. Machine learning algorithms are considered a subfield of artificial intelligence. They are designed to train a computer program how to learn from experience with respect to some tasks and its performance measure. These algorithms have a wide range of potential applications in forensic DNA analysis and beyond. As illustrated by a growing body of literature, the use of machine learning algorithms in forensic science in general and forensic DNA analysis in particular can provide valuable insights by supporting decision-making processes and minimizing human subjectivity. Machine learning algorithms offer significant advantages over current methods of DNA data analysis and interpretation and are gradually becoming incorporated into routine casework. Yeah, they're gradually becoming this type of technology and technique are gradually becoming incorporated into routine casework. And this is the exact reason why we need to be cautious with invisible DNA. However, as with any novel forensic tool, machine learning methods must be extensively tested and validated prior to operational implementation. Consequently, the proper validated computational algorithms can improve the throughput and reliability of evidence analysis and reduce the implicit subjectivity of human interpretation. The problem with that is some of these private labs, when they're black box, I think it goes into black box, but they could already be using these things, but nobody knows because it's a black box. Nobody is allowed to know. The court is never going to know. But who's going to know that they're actually doing this so they can hide behind the black box and we don't really know what they're doing. So some of the major limitations preventing rapid implementation of machine learning methods, and especially deep learning methods, include the requirements for very large and relevant training sets representing the widest spectrum of possible cases, significant computational resources to allow superior processing capacity, and training of highly skilled personnel with the knowledge that is not readily available in most operational laboratories. Most importantly, the upcoming implementation of machine learning platforms in forensic DNA analysis and other forensic disciplines must remain transparent as possible rather than a process specified only in terms of the relationship between inputs and outputs that uses information to produce a particular set of results, also known as the black box approach. A lack of transparency can undermine the reliability and validity of the results produced by these algorithms. And so the techniques such as decision trees, rule-based models, the BiCN networks, and the use of separate train test validation sets can help improve transparency and reliability of machine learning algorithms used in forensic science. By developing more transparent and interpretable, i.e. white box algorithms, we can increase confidence in the results produced by machine learning algorithms and ensure their acceptability in legal contexts. Okay, here's the last paragraph of the conclusion. The integration of machine learning methods and forensic science represents an objective and irreversible progression. That's another reason to add caution. In a similar manner, novel technologies like digital photography were gradually incorporated into expert practice. Initially, there was skepticism within the expert community concerning digital photography, authors' personal communication, and nevertheless, as image quality improved and digital technology advanced, its seamless integration into expert practice occurred without altering the fundamental principles of forensic photography. In the present day, it is nearly impossible to find documentation of a crime scene or an expert report without digital photographs. In a similar manner, the implementation of machine learning algorithms is expected to be a valuable asset for analyzing and interpreting challenging forensic evidence. Their primary advantage lies in streamlining analysis, reducing workloads, and minimizing the subjectivity of the decision-making process. However, considering the technology's relatively nascent state, it may take a significant amount of time before machines can completely replace human experts. Now, yeah, so like when I read DNA articles, this is the kind of stuff I would pick up. I thought that this one was really important. And it's called Machine Learning Applications in Forensic DNA Profiling, a critical review, and it highlights the scientific foundation of machine learning algorithms is explained. Machine learning applications in the area of forensic DNA analysis are briefly discussed. Recent machine learning developments in the human DNA identification field are critically reviewed. Advantages and challenges of implementing machine learning methods into operational casework are addressed. Now, one of the reasons why I did want to read this is because I don't know, are they going to move away from blood DNA? And they're trying to like write in a lot of these scholarly journals, and they're trying to reiterate that, oh yeah, DNA is the gold standard. Yeah. But I think trace DNA is something completely different than blood DNA, especially because your trace DNA can be on a surface or an object in a room where you never were. And so they can do all these advanced technologies, but you could be doing it to an innocent person. So just be careful with trace DNA. Be careful about how much weight you put on DNA, because now DNA is exploding into different technologies that we don't really understand. Or, I'm having trouble understanding them. I think I understand the basics of what, but, I'm just trying to get the basics out. And I think this is integrity. I think the only, like, immune response, or, is to kind of counterbalance all of this new technology with us knowing a little bit about it so that we can make better decisions. And if we have information like this where we're not understanding all of it, then we shouldn't, this is not legal advice, but we shouldn't be giving the state guilty verdicts when all of this goes into invisible evidence. I just think that as future jurors, we should be careful. I mean, of course, the other evidence, you'll weigh it, however you do when you're in that room. Just remember and be cautious that there is a push to keep DNA as the gold standard, but I don't know how true that is anymore, especially when you're using trace DNA and there's all of these ways, room for error, even though they're like, human decisions, subjective, and we want to take that away. There's still a lot of room for error with machine learning and AI as well. So I hope that helped, and I hope that was interesting. I mean, I love reading about this stuff, and I read about it all the time. I'm going to thank you all for being here. I'm so happy you came. I've been on here for almost 3 hours. Wow. Okay, well, I'm going to stop for lunch. You all have a great day, and I will see you next time.